Good evening. I welcome you tonight to another story, another world. So leave your day behind and settle into the night. Billy and his three friends, Jack, James, and Lawrence, were best buddies. They grew up together in a small rural town and were always there for each other, no matter what. Even though they were from a small town, they all had really big dreams, and they used to get the best grades in high school. Teachers and students alike used to admire them for their hard work. And then they moved to universities, but used to meet once a year for their cabin road trip in the snow-covered mountains around Christmas time. When they used to be back in town, the whole town knew about it, as they were the loudest in restaurants, bars, and especially after visiting the bars. And like every other winter vacation, they planned to do this road trip again this time. Billy pulled up into Jack's driveway, with the other two in the back seat, and Billy horned and horned until the neighbors got so annoyed that they closed their curtains. Jack finally came out, threw his backpack in the trunk. With so much luggage already in the trunk, he had to really push it hard to close it. Jack got into the front passenger seat, and they drove off waving goodbye to Jack's mom. And they planned to stop at a truck stop to get some more food, alcohol, and cigarettes. James and Lawrence, who were sitting in the back, both shouted, "Surprise!" and took out 2 bottles of some really strong vodka and gin. They all started to drink it, and before long were seriously drunk, except for Billy, who knew he was driving, so had to really watch his alcohol levels. It was around 3 hours since they left home, and were getting very close to the truck stop. It started to snow a little by this time, and Billy was having a hard time trying to focus on the road. And suddenly, he had to stop. They all froze for a second, but luckily it was just a deer running past, and they all looked at each other and started laughing. They could now see the truck stop's red banner and pulled into its car park. They all got out and ran towards the toilets, and when they came out, they went into the shop to get some more snacks, alcohol, and cigarettes. Billy filled up the gas tank, and they all sat in the car with the windows rolled down, trying to get some fresh air and some rest. They were all talking about how well they've done to get to the universities of their choices. And then Billy said he was getting really tired, and by this point he just wanted to get going, as the others were in no shape to drive, and Billy definitely didn't want to fall asleep on the wheel. They rolled up their windows and pulled out of the car park and onto the main highway. After a few more hours, they finally reached the mountains and started to head up towards the cabin. They finally got to the cabin. It was a pitch black cabin in the woods. They got their stuff out, threw it on the cabin wooden floor, and lit up the fire. And started to get warm. And as every year, they argued about who was taking which bed. They opened up more alcohol bottles and started to drink. The light in the cabin was really dim, and the only other light coming was from the fire. They all settled into the night. The next morning, the parents were expecting their phone call to let them know that they had arrived, but heard nothing. The whole day went past with no news of the four. The parents got really worried and contacted the police, who alerted the mountain rescue team to go out to the cabin and search for them. A few hours go by, and the local police officer in the town received a call from the rescue team. The officer holding the phone suddenly dropped to his seat, and all he could say was, "Oh my God. Oh my God." And the other two officers asked him what had happened. He looked at them and said they needed to go and visit their parents. The rescue team reached the cabin a few hours prior to making this call. Two of them shouted at the boys from outside, but got no response. When they opened the door, they were met with a horrific scene. Three of them were stabbed brutally, and one was missing. They got closer and had been sent photos of the boys, which they had with them. Lying on the cabin floor, they were able to identify those bodies of Jack, James, and Lawrence, with no sign of Billy. With no sign of Billy, they alerted the mountain police, who got their search dogs out, and they were running and barking with the officers through the woods. And finally, when they got to one of the trees, they saw Billy hanging from a tree with an old rope tied around his neck. They cut down the rope, got on his body, and found an old mini tape recorder in his pocket. They hit the rewind button and then the play button. It was Billy's voice. He told his mom and dad to forgive him for what he has done. He told them he was not happy, and he was constantly being bullied by these three. They were not his real friends, and they used him at every chance they could. He could not live with himself with this, and had no other option but to kill them. Billy said that the boys had planned this trip to kill him, and when he overheard them, he planned to kill them himself. They thought they were planning, but he was planning everything from the start. From not drinking from their alcohol bottles, which were filled with sleeping tablets. Once they were fast asleep, Billy said in the mini tape recorder that he brutally killed them in their sleep. And Billy said in the end of the recording that they made him do things he could not sleep with. It haunted him every night, and he had no other option but to escape this nightmare through this way. Police visited the parents' homes and finally got to Billy's parents' home. His mom fell to the ground screaming, and officers could not believe such a strong group of friends who grew up together could meet such a terrible end with such a dark secret buried between them, that they had to be murdered. Funerals were held throughout the coming weeks, and the whole town mourned their deaths. Police started the investigation and interviewed dozens of people close to the boys. Since they were best buddies since high school, they visited the school and spoke with the teachers and staff members, who also said that Billy being bullied has come as a complete shock to them, and never felt that this was being done behind their backs. The head teacher of the school gave police a list of all the teachers to interview, and the police went through all of them one by one. Some had moved out of the town and some left, so they had to be contacted via telephone. Police visited one of the boys' teachers who was very close to the boys and was like a mentor to them, as per the head teacher. The officer in charge, Ryan, knocked on the door of the teacher. Nobody answered. He rang the bell and rang the bell again, and finally the door unlocked itself. The intercom voice asked the officer to come inside. The officer walked through the hallway to the living room, and there was a man lying on his bed with health monitoring devices around him. He was bedbound. The officer greeted him and he replied and confirmed that he was the teacher. The officer took a chair and sat next to the teacher, and the teacher told the officer that he was in complete shock and disbelief after hearing the news. He said that the boys were the smartest ones in his class and had such a bright future ahead of them. He said he was like a father figure to them. The teacher went on to explain that Billy seemed the least happy out of the group, but never expected him to be bullied. Ryan, the officer, thanked the teacher for his time and left his card with the teacher to call him if he could think of anything else. Ryan left the house with the door locking itself. Ryan came back to the police headquarters and began watching the video surveillance tape of the truck stop over and over again. He couldn't find anything on it, so he finally got up, poured some coffee from the coffee machine, and lit up a cigarette, undid his tie, and went through everything. He took out the mini tape recorder and played it again and again. He then heard something very distinctive. He rewinded the tape and he heard it again. And when he finally realized he was in complete disbelief, he got up, got his gun and badge, asked his partner to get into the car. His mind was racing. How could it be? How could it possibly be? Nothing made sense. The car stopped. Ryan and his partner both got out of the car. They were outside the teacher's house. Ryan went through the back and broke the door down and got in. There was nobody there. The bed was empty. The teacher was never paralyzed. He was the murderer of the boys. As last winter, the boys made the same trip to the cabin, got very drunk. Billy was driving, and just when the teacher and his family were crossing the road, Billy hit and killed his wife and 3 children. The teacher was severely injured, and through blood dripping down from his face, crawled towards his family on the road. He saw Billy and the other boys coming out of the car, and because of his bloody face, they couldn't recognize him. They got back in the car and drove off. The teacher was in coma for a few weeks, and by the time he woke up, his family had already been buried. He decided from there that he would live 2 lives. In front of the world, he was a paralyzed, broken man. But in reality, he was a man with a vengeance on his mind. The sound the officer heard in the background was the teacher's digital watch, which was beeping. And that was the same sound he heard when he visited the teacher's house. The teacher disguised his looks, and when the boys pulled over, he told them that his vehicle had broken down and needed help to get to the mountains. The teacher was actually in the car throughout the whole journey with the boys. He was a shadow, the fifth person, sitting in the back, between the two boys, planning all this for a year. He added some sleeping tablets in the alcohol bottles when they went out in the truck stop. Little did they know that the murderer was sitting in between them. When they got to the cabin, the teacher killed the three boys brutally and told Billy to record a confession. He took Billy into the woods, tied his neck with an old rope, hung him on an old tree branch, and placed the mini tape recorder in his pocket. The whereabouts of the teacher is still unknown. He's still a shadow. Good night.